Hello, everyone, and welcome back again this week to On the Settee. This is actually our last talk of the artist series, and I cannot believe this month has gone past like so quickly. We hope again that you're all okay. Considering where we're at in society right now. I wanted to welcome you not only to the Settee, but to the front room. For those of you who might be there first time here, the front room is a kind of long-term ambitious neighbourhood platform in Birmingham to be designed and grown and co-owned by local communities. Currently, we're online. Hello. We will kind of be back to our physical dreams when it's safe to do so. I want to give you a little bit of insight into what On the Settee is. In the front room, the Settee offers a place of sanctuary, a place where you can take a load off. And on our Settee, you'll discover conversations that will slot into your day, like a catch up with an old friend or your favourite song. So something that makes you feel at home, open yet vulnerable, but still connected to yourself and other people. Just so kind of the background of what we're doing, why we're all here today, especially if it's your first time or you've been to maybe one talk and you're back again. Welcome back, thank you. So we just want to kind of welcome you all in. Today, I'm your host, Danni Ebanks-Ingram, also known as Zaz or Zazu. And my motivations for creating this kind of artist series On the Settee was to respond to where we're at in our current social climate. What are the conversations that we should be having? What are the conversations that we're not having? What are the conversations that just don't have a space to happen yet? And how do we create that space? So this was my way of kind of doing that. We want to use this time as a place to reflect as well. So today I'll be speaking with Cass, who is a deaf educator, a deaf companion, where they sit alongside grief in all its intersects and complexities, and are actively in person and virtually here. Cass has witnessed and parented and held vigils with deaf, and their practice to find life within that context is held in the ethos of navigating the wilderness, and it's embodied to do that. Today this talk is sensitive, it's deep-rooted. A lot of us are dealing with death, loss, grief, a lot of different areas of our lives, and it is one of those conversations where we want to kind of discuss these things that are difficult and do that in a way that is supportive. So we will have resources that will be posted in the chat of signposted resources for aftercare of this talk and care within the talk. We want to make sure that when we're talking about these topics, which are often difficult, that we are aware of kind of sometimes the aftermath of that. We're going to kind of just get into it. So firstly, I just want Cass to come on, give us a wave, tell us a little bit about themselves and the work that they do. Cass, when you're ready.
Hello. So you kind of summed it up really well. I just spend a lot of time having conversations like these, really, in informal ways and in more formal ways. So I do sort of academic research on grief and loss, and look at grief through an arts perspective, and it's my work as well. So kind of in everything I do, really.
Thank you. So just to let people know, the Q&A is open. So please, throughout the talk, if you've got any questions for Cass, just drop them in the Q&A and we will kind of get to that section. So today, this talk is a little bit different how I've kind of framed it. Normally I have questions written down and, we kind of flow. But actually, because of the topics that we're speaking about, I really wanted to kind of split it up into some different sections. We can kind of cover quite a lot, or quite a few areas in this time. So firstly, I wanted to speak a little bit about the kind of the work that has kind of started, that got you kind of into this, a little bit about your kind of background, and what kind of prompted this work, this area for you.
So in 2017, I was working in the charity sector. I was very bored, but I was okay. It was just about to go off and have my first baby, and it was kind of just plodding along, vaguely interested in stuff. I was doing a psychology degree, and I don't know, I think I just felt like I was waiting a little bit, really. And then I had my daughter Nora in 2017, and she was wonderful, and looked exactly like me, exactly like Rob. This weird thing happens when you have a baby, when you just sort of look at them and you're like, it's an actual baby, oh my god.
They actually have my features? Wow.
Yeah, like I know that I've been like doing this for like 9 months now, but oh my god, it's actually here, and I know what to do with her, and she looks exactly like I expected her to look like, but totally different all at the same time. So yeah, it's a really weird experience, but the best. And then she went and died on us, which is kind of a bit of a casual way of saying that, the most traumatic thing that happened to me and my family, really. We don't know why she died, but she was just a week old when she wasn't breathing, and then we had an extra week with her in intensive care, and then we let her go, and quite poetically she managed to live for exactly 2 weeks. So yeah, her little life was rounded off quite neatly. And Nora kind of permeates all of this, but she's also quite separate from it as well. Mm-hmm. So initially, I was thinking, after talking to you earlier in the week, how on earth I got started here, like what the actual steps were to this. And I realised that the very first creative process that I went through after Nora died was planning Nora's funeral and writing her eulogy, which is one of the first things that a lot of people do when they lose somebody that they love, or maybe somebody that they don't love, but they have a duty to do so. And you kind of find yourself in this position where you have to craft a narrative of who they were, or in my case, and in a lot of other cases of bereaved parents, who they would have been, who you imagine them to be. And yeah, that was the first sort of moment where I somehow created a ceremony. We found a natural burial ground, so Nora was buried in a wildflower woodland, a stunning place, and that was really important because it felt like she'd spent so much of her life inside, she'd never got to experience the outside of life. And then there's a really specific day that we've been struggling to do everything naturally. But I was sat in my garden, literally sat next to a hedge, and this hedgehog just wandered past me. I'd never seen a hedgehog in my garden before. And it was just so hilarious and heartening, and so many other things. It was like, okay, well, if a hedgehog can walk past me right now while I'm sat on the floor writing a eulogy for my daughter, I can probably get through the next hour. And then the next hour kind of turns into maybe the next half a day, and the next day, week, month. So I kind of followed those processes through, and I'm not religious. I don't have any kind of belief in an afterlife, and I wouldn't have considered myself before this to have any kind of spirituality. So that was quite difficult, because I had to kind of grab something for myself and for my family. So that's where it started. It started with writing that eulogy. We keep a diary that we write to Nora in, just telling her what we've been doing and what we would have sort of imagined that she might be doing now. And she's kind of all around the house now and various different things. So in that response, I didn't want to work in the charity sector anymore. I didn't want to sit behind a desk anymore and think about what funding politics we'd have to play, or just stationery, or I felt like in the moment that Nora died, I woke up and looked around and I thought, I'd rather sit in the hedge and watch the hedgehogs go past than sit in an office and try and sort of do whatever we do in offices. So I left that job, and then the job happened to be next door to Impact Hub Birmingham, and I thought, well, I might as well sit in there for a bit and see if I can figure some of this stuff out. And then suddenly I was just in this community full of artists and writers and thinkers, and it was a space where I could, on my worst of days, if I could do the process of picking up my phone and ordering an Uber and getting in a cab, then I would be all right, because I could do that. I could get in the cab, I could go to Impact Hub, and I could just sit on my own and cry if that was all I was going to do. But that was okay, that was enough. And Impact Hub is where I then met Annika Diva, who set up the first learning marathon in Birmingham. None of us really knew what that was at the time either. It was a group of people getting together to spend 6 months together to ask questions. And because it was Impact Hub, I felt like I could ask questions about death, because there wasn't any topics at Impact Hub that were off limits in any way. And I did, and people responded to it, and it genuinely surprised me. And I had myself and Annika are good friends now, and we had a conversation at the very beginning where we were both really concerned about bringing something like death into a group of people that weren't grieving, that weren't going through something terrible. And it was almost like a model for being able to kind of craft what a space that was really supportive of people's grief could look like. And everything else has come out of that. So I suddenly realised that I knew how to write and draw and and loads of other stuff. And you spend time around artists in the hub, and everyone's asking the same questions that you are, like, what does it actually mean to be an artist, and can I actually say I'm an artist? And
exactly, is that almost allowed? What is that? I wanted to kind of ask you something, and I guess it's more of a comment than it is a question, but going from working kind of in an office, having this like awful thing happen, and then going to almost like a space where you felt that there was, the questions weren't off limits, you could open up a dialogue. Do you think that space of opening up that dialogue was something that allowed you to do it in a way that was like normalized? Is that what made it feel okay, that it was normalized, that it was like people understood, even if they weren't experiencing it, but they understood something else about someone's experience? Is it kind of tied up in that?
Yeah, so I think I would have done it anyway, with all the credit in the world to the people that I met at that time, including yourself. I think I would have done it anyway, but I think I would have been making people a lot more uncomfortable by doing it visibly. And I think that space of, okay, we don't quite understand what you're going through, but we're kind of accepting of anything here. It was that just like normalization of whatever, and whether that was, whatever we would do when we were there, it was okay to do that. Like, you weren't met with a resistance of who you were and what you were experiencing at that time, and that everything that I do is to foster that outside of Impact Hub, outside of those community spaces, outside of the safety of our family. I want to live in a world where I can tell people that I have children. I have 2 children. One of them died, but she's still my daughter. Like, I want to hear other people's stories. I want to when somebody tells me about themselves, I want to hear about the aunt that was so influential in their life, but they very rarely talk about because they don't feel like they've got a space to anymore. You know, I really I crave those stories because they're interwoven with every part of who we are, but we leave them in our grief, and that just feels so alien to me.
I totally understand that, and I think as well, something that happens is, you know, we really hone in on these experiences that are happy and joyful, and we really want to share those and almost bring people in, like, you know, you want people to almost add their daisy to the chain. And I think when it's those subjects and topics that actually really, they're difficult, but they're normal, right? Like, these are things that are happening to people every day. We grieve, we grieve like ourselves, we grieve like the loss of normality. There's so many things that actually grief and loss is tied up into that actually isn't always black and white. It's never just, you know, these two things and they're binary. And actually what I'm interested about in with what you do is the fact that you're looking at those intersects and the nuances, and for what that is. So I wanted to speak a little bit about, and you mentioned this a little bit, about how your art practice has come into your work and kind of that side of it. Yeah, if you want to just speak a little bit about that, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I think that there's a few things that came to mind when you were talking. There was about like the good, the happy bits and the sad bits, like kind of sitting together. Like one of the, like explaining that to yourself is hard enough, but kind of explaining that to anybody else and communicating that is really, really difficult. And one of the really kind of significant moments in figuring that out was myself and Rob, Nora's dad, were sitting together to put together just a photo album of our photographs. And we kind of got halfway through, and we went through our first week, and then we just stopped. We just couldn't look at it again for a couple of months, actually. And I think, I don't know what quite triggered it, but we both kind of came to the same conclusion that we couldn't erase the second week of her life just because it was sad and difficult and traumatic. Because even in those spaces, even in the worst of our moments, we laughed. We talked about how amazing Nora was. We told stories to the nurses of the life that we expected to have and the life that we have had up to that point. So there's something really unique about experiencing death so shortly after birth that kind of forces you to look at both of them together. And there's loads of parallels the other way around as well. So like having a baby can feel a lot, there's a lot of grief involved in that as well, like you're saying about the loss of yourself and identity and spaces, and it permeates all aspects. So I started looking at ways that I could express that to myself mostly. It kind of brought me back to the little hedgehog wandering through the hedges, and sort of just looking outside and learning lessons from like the seasonal changes. And so we have the best book that I kind of our family learned so much from. Wasn't a grief book, it was a death book. It was a children's book, and it's about a tree, and it's a tree walking through the seasons. And we would always read that book when we went to see to Nora's burial spot. And it was kind of those connections were like, okay, so even though the tree sort of dies and withers and it still comes back, and you know we've got a mantra of you know, just look for the spring, always just look for the spring. And we kind of knew that if we could get to the end of that first year, we'd see the spring again. And it's not as simplistic as that. There's terrible things in the middle of that as well. But yeah, it was doing that, and then I started just my sort of my diaries turned to doodles, and then I remembered. So when I was a child, I don't have a lot of memories from my childhood. as quite a few people that have experienced trauma don't. But one of my really significant memories was going to a sewing club. I used to go to like a breakfast club, and like there was this sort of the sort of Matilda type teacher, the Miss Honey teacher, who is just a wonderful person that taught me how to sew. And I was thinking about her one day, and I wondered if I could still sew and what that might look like. So I just started stitching. It was all very sort of nature and sort of seasonal type stuff. And it just sort of evolved from there. So sort of weaving those, literally like weaving the threads and making those connections. And then I started using the embroidery to reflect the language that we use around it. So I did a project that was, I embroidered, and I haven't actually sat and worked out how long it took, but it probably took a very long time. Yeah. You're talking maybe a month's worth of work, like solid hours of work. And I had embroideries that had like things, the euphemisms that we use around it. So I had lost, passed away, those sorts of phrases. And when I sat and looked at them all together and looked at the sort of the physical nature of, I could almost see like with every stitch there's like these thoughts that are coming along about experiences and stories, and every conversation I have is kind of stitched into that thread. And there's something about making it tangible as well. So people that have lost somebody very often will have items of clothing, or it's not so much the digital stuff that we hold on to, it's the physical stuff. And for Nora, we didn't have a lot of physical stuff because she hadn't been around for very long. So it was kind of like creating stuff for her as well. And I noticed that pattern in a lot of other bereaved people and people that are in grief. And it seemed like a natural place to sort of fall within.
Yeah. And you know what you're mentioning about the embroidery, because I've been embroidering quite a lot now, and which is really amazing. But what I find is I tend to go back to it when I need almost like space, when I need time and space. Like I can't sit and embroider if like the TV's on or whatever, because it kind of goes with, like you said, each stitch. It's like these thoughts, right, that are kind of coming out while you're doing that task. And I always think of like, if I want to make something that's like a bit bigger or anything like that, it's always these things that are really revealing about like me or what's been going on in my head. And I think in that way, crafting really has helped me not only like give my hand something to do, but it is really deeper than that in the sense of the release. And obviously we know that's why a lot of people make work and share artwork, because it's kind of, you're sharing a bit of yourself, but you're sharing in a way that that sometimes feels meditative, and kind of can come out in a way that doesn't, it kind of has its own like filters, right? Like the planning, the stitching, the actual creating, its own filters towards the project.
And it forces me to sit with what I'm thinking as well. So like I can't, it's much more about the process than the finished piece. And I know that if I haven't embroidered for a while, I'm probably actually avoiding something, because it's a lot easier to sit the TV on, to do, even just like doing this work. I'm confronting grief and death all the time, but it's so much easier for me to sit and write about it, or to kind of do some research or anything else. But actually, if there's something I'm struggling with myself, I generally can tell that I'm not sort of looking at that, because if I sit and embroider, that's all I've got. I can't do that when Ivan's around. So my other child, I can't do that when my baby's around, and I can't do it when other people are around. I can't do it when there's something on. So I really sort of ruminate on what I'm doing at that point.
I really feel that it just kind of is. It's a different place. But yeah, it's interesting that you say that you're kind of doing it and you're like, there's probably something that I need to like think about in this time or in this moment. So what I want to kind of go to move into a bit of the next bit is I wanted to talk a little bit about the academic side of what you're doing. And I want to do that because for me, there's this a process that I personally would like to kind of understand. And I think it's important that people also get that kind of information. So when we're thinking about death, grief, loss, we're kind of very in our own heads about it, and it's very feeling insular. So I kind of wanted to speak about the research side and the academic side, because actually, what does that mean when you are learning about something and almost like it being a practice, a way of kind of life, of understanding things, and not just in your own head or in your own body? Like, what does that mean for you? And yeah, and is there any research that kind of you looked at and you were like, wow, that's something that I needed to read, and maybe it's express kind of how you felt?
Yeah, it was quite sort of normal of me to turn to research, because that's something that I've always done. That's always been a part of who I am. So the reason I mentioned at the start I was doing a psychology degree, and that was because I have a long-term experience of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and my own experience of that sort of led me to psychology in a context where there are not safe services there weren't for me at the time, and that's with a level of privilege in accessing stuff. But yeah, it turned me to look to psychology because I could get some answers for myself initially. And once I started processing that stuff myself, I was a bit like, well, I could make some changes here, actually. I could make some changes to the way the services are delivered. I could ask some questions to some people that might be able to make some more changes. And I still wanted to do that after Nora died, but it just didn't feel right to do that, because so much of it was still tied up into grief. And Julia Samuels is a grief counsellor, psychotherapist, and she's written a brilliant book on grief, and she cites in there that I think it's up to a third of mental illness, the root of it is unresolved grief. And when I read that, I thought, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder if anyone's actually looking at that. Because even in our mental health services, we don't talk about death and grief. You'll be diagnosed with depression and anxiety if you go to your GP for support. A lot of people are given antidepressants far too early in the grief process. So there was lots of ties in with that. And I kind of looked at it and I just couldn't see it, despite the fact that I could see lots of people talking about grief and death. I didn't see the research and the academia behind it. And that's okay, because it doesn't have to go through those channels to be a proper thing, right? It doesn't have to be heavily researched, but that was one avenue to do so. And so I'm studying with the Open University, and I found out they had a death and dying research module, a research group that I kind of connected with, and just found this little quiet underground movement of people in academia that were asking questions about death, dying, and grief. And that hit a real sort of, I think there's something quite, we have a lot of the structures that our problems in society reflected in that work, but we also there's a lot of people that are really using it as an activism in academia as well as in death studies. So death studies is the name that sort of is being passed around a little bit at the moment, but the people involved in that work are truly multidisciplinary. They come from so many different backgrounds. So I'm really passionate about access to academia in non-traditional routes. So I didn't go to university like properly. I've been doing my undergraduate degree for nearly 7 years now, and I still haven't quite finished it. But I still felt I had something to add to that. So it was an avenue for that, as well as understanding my own grief. Then even in the sort of the research that I looked at, a lot of it was it just, there wasn't an awful lot that was really radical about it. And I think that if you can bring radical people into that space, you can actually create something that's really properly meaningful. And there's quite a few groups that are doing that, so it seemed like a good place for me to kind of find myself. But yeah, I think research is important, but it's also quite dangerous. So we have, I'm sure everybody that talks about grief talks about, you know, the five stages of grief, which is largely misunderstood because it was given, it was presented initially as a model of grief that was seen in people who were terminally ill, going through their own grief process.
Okay.
So whilst it's a theory that's kind of passed around, it's still very useful, but it's kind of led to this discourse of you experience grief in a really neat, even way, and there's lots of people that are challenging that at the moment. But I kind of thought, well, if that model is so wrong, is there something out there that is a bit more understandable, that is a bit more sort of relevant to people's experiences? And there's two models of grief that I'm really interested in that do, for me, reflect my experience, and for the people that I've spoken to. So I think it does have a place in doing this work, in equipping people with sort of the skills and the safety to speak about these sorts of things. But it's full of its own problems as well. I'm kind of going off to a big tangent there, but the kind of the two theories, the two models of grief. So there is the continuing bonds model, which is something that I am so passionate about, which is the idea that when somebody dies, our bond to them, our relationship with them does not end. And I think that's quite instinctual in most people anyway, but there's no room for that in our society at the moment. There's no room for that in our workplaces, there's no room for that in our conversations. So this idea that you can foster this relationship with the person that has died on an ongoing basis, that is it might be a spiritual connection. For me, it's just like an inner monologue type feeling of like, Nora's here and she's such a huge part of me that bond hasn't been severed. And then there's the dual process model, which says that there's two streams of grief, which so one stream is the stuff that we think of typically when we think of grief. It's the crying, it's the sadness, it's the stuff that might be thought of as negative. It's not negative, it's important, but it might be seen as negative. And then there's the renewal side. So that is about anything to do with restoration. So that's about the steps that you take forward. It's about the adjustments that you make to the relationships that you have now, the structures and things. It's about doing hobbies. It's about taking your mind off it. And the process of grief is oscillating between those two stages. So there's so much stuff in that as well about people that get sort of your problems are likely to come in if you're stuck in one of the two stages, but moving between them is completely normal and natural. But we don't understand that that's normal and natural. We think of grief as quite a linear, fixed thing. So I think that model is so useful for thinking about, because it kind of gives you an idea that, you know, if you're moving between those states, you're probably doing okay. You're probably processing, you're probably adjusting, you're probably finding room to develop that continuing bond with the person.
I totally understand that, because my partner's dad passed away. It's been a year now, and Nat often speaks about the grief that she feels as being it's in waves. It's never, oh, this is a great time, like you know, I'm like connected with my dad and that's it. This is always the thing, and it's never just, I'm really sad because my dad's not here. There's always these nuances that are coming in, and you know, sometimes it's really interesting how we've kind of dealt with grief in our flat, because it's just me and Nat, and when we are talking about like her dad, it's like it's this, you know, this conversation of like absolute like joy, love, and like almost feeling like you said that he's like totally here and totally like connected. And then it's also that wave of emotion that actually like some of that joy is really linked into the physical aspects of being able to see him, being able to talk to him, or, you know, hold his hands, because they were like really like these squishy, fluffy hands, like, you know, and it's really important, like you're saying, that actually to look at these models that are looking at grief as a really layered feeling and process. You know, some people may have you know, had like an amazing job and then life was totally like set up, and then they lose that and that's totally gone. And actually that's something that rocks your whole world, right? And it's something that has lasting effects. And I think if you talk about it in a sense of someone losing their job, you can say, oh my gosh, that must be awful because, you know, there's like less money or there's less structure, da, 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 da. And it's easy for us to say that if you're talking about something like a job. And I think sometimes people find it difficult to say that if you're talking about like death, for instance, because obviously losing your job, it's still loss, right? So I think it's harder for people to speak about that when it comes to death, because, you know, sometimes people feel that they should just be okay, like they should just, you know, in the society that we're in, it's about getting on, right? You just need to do the things that you need to do. And I think that can also really stifle people in the process. Well, like what you said when you were saying, you know, if you're kind of having these waves, you're probably doing okay, like because you're feeling, you're there in it. And I think sometimes that space is really hard to be in, really hard to be in. And I've spoken about this quite a lot in like my therapy sessions, where like my therapist has said, if you're feeling like you're really going through like the dark forest, you're probably doing the right thing. Like the therapy is probably actually really helping. And it's almost like allowing yourself to go through the dark forest, and then some like rays of sunshine might come in at some points.
Yeah, but it's hard. It's beyond hard. We don't have it the word to describe what that feels like, and that's kind of where navigating the wilderness came from. Because grief to me just felt like this complete, like this vast, empty, terrible place, and it even that. So I'm only, you know, I'm 3 years on. So in grief land, that's not very long at all. So we're just coming up to what would have been my third birthday. And just I know all of this. I know all of this stuff. I know my own grief, but it's always changing. It's always evolving. And there are, in those moments, you know, it's easy to sit and talk about it like it's this beautiful, life-affirming process, but it's crap. It's absolutely crap. When I frequently, when I have these really huge feelings where it's almost like something breaks through, and I actually feel the fact that my daughter died. I can actually feel it. And it's not any other life getting in the way. It's just like sometimes something breaks down and you really properly remember what that felt like, or what that feels like, or and it's completely consuming. And one of my things is I frequently, when I'm feeling like that, I say to Rob, my husband, I say, like, am I always going to feel like this? Like, is this how I'm going to feel for the rest of my life? And he's like, well, no, like, because you asked me that last time and you kind of came out of it and you were okay. In 50 years' time, you might feel exactly like this. Yeah, absolutely, because that's what grief is.
Yeah.
Because she's always going to be dead, and it's not just, you know, Nora that I've lost, but obviously she's the most significant. But yeah, I think like if we can't recognise that that's a process that moves, it's really scary to be in the darkest times.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, and it's also it's still like this timeline, right? It's happened, and it's part of your lived experience. And that in itself is is almost like you can't put your finger on it. Do you know what I mean? And it's probably not the best way to describe it, but there's just something about it where you can't put your finger on it, because there's no time that you can kind of look into the future and say, at this point, I'm sure like this has to work. Like I can't get this feeling in my chest, but like you said, it happened and it's there. Like, you know, sorry, my getting a bit choked up, but yeah, it's just this thing that is constant, and not constant in the way that it's like a woodpecker tapping at like a tree, you know. And I think that in itself is so difficult when we are kind of acknowledging what's happened as well. I think the acknowledging is sometimes the bit that really gets you. And for me, like I was really close to my grandparents, and a big thing that really pulled the rug from underneath me was when they both like passed away. And it was almost like, even like on a day-to-day, like I don't really speak about my grandparents that much, or I do, but mainly with like maybe my dad or something, because his parents, and my dad knows how close I was to them. But there are definitely days where I'm like, a lot of the time I don't feel I need to speak about them because I am them. Like I'll do stuff, I'm like, oh my God, wow. You know what I mean? Or how I say things, or how I like connect with like Jamaican culture is like totally them. And then there's like these little things, I'm like, oh, that's really, like, you know, it's like, oh, that's nice. Like I've just done that, and I'm like seeing them all the time, in my own actions, my own behavior. And those are things for me that bring like these small like bits of like joy, but then at the same time it then brings up the fact that they're not here, and I don't get to do that, or go and see them or experience like who they would be like now or whatever, you know. And I think sometimes that's really is the difficulty. I just wanted to move on a little bit into the kind of more business aspect, I guess, because you know you're a death educator, you're a grief coach, and you do consultancy. I just wanted you to speak a little bit about that, in terms of how did you almost make, I guess, like a transition in a way, because obviously you are actively dealing with something that is so personal to you. And then how did it feel for you to transfer all of this into, okay, I can offer this to people, and how does that feel?
Yeah, so and that's kind of it is an evolving process, and I think it will always be an evolving process. And there's been a lot of, I felt really hesitant about doing it because there's something in me that just feels a bit gross about doing that and getting money for it. But despite the fact that it isn't getting money for it, it's being able to pay for food and water and electricity, and that's it. And before I set this up, I was doing it for nothing, and that was fine. But we were really struggling, and I wasn't ready to stop doing this work, and it feels more important than ever. So I had to kind of look at why that was so uncomfortable for me. And in doing that, I realised it was because I was tying up so much of it with Nora still. Because it was, you know, I sat for a good couple of months just like, I'm going to set this business up, but I don't know what to call it. And everyone around me was saying, well, you've already got a name, you're navigating the wilderness, you've got this platform that, you know, it's a small platform, but it's there. You've already established something with that. And I was like, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything to, you know, you can't start offering something that is totally unknown and call it something a bit weird and a bit meaningless. And I kind of had this sort of process where I sat down, as ever, you know, with Rob and conversations with investment Dawn, and started unpicking all that stuff. And I really had to rip it right down to the core and look at myself before I could do anything else. And that's how I kind of ended up splitting the two out. So navigating the wilderness is mine. I feel very protective that concept of whatever that is. And the fact that I don't really know what it is, like, that's okay. I kind of just accepted it as a bit of an ethos, and this sort of navigating the wilderness of like the really messy, horrible stuff, but also the fact that I just love being in nature and kind of what I learned from that as well.
Yeah.
And that kind of allowed me to sort of, it's not compartmentalizing, but it's using that to learn and understand what I'm doing with the sort of more professional practice.
Yeah.
I say professional, but you know, business or whatever you call it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of the way that I keep those two things separate. And I also feel like I have a responsibility if I am delivering this education, this training, this advice, being a sounding board for somebody to work out whether their project is sensitive to the needs of people that are grieving, or all of those sorts of things that I do. I have a responsibility to come to that as a person that is a presence that can hold that and leave my own grief aside. And I don't leave it aside totally. There's still lots that I learn from that and bring into. So navigating the wilderness sort of informs the thanatology practice. But it's my responsibility, if I'm going to stand up and do this work, to do it in a way that is safe for the people that I'm working with. And I can only do that by sort of formalising it and, you know, still sort of keeping the humanity in it and keeping my processes of grief in it, but taking Laura out of it and taking the other people I've lost out of it and taking my family out of it as well, is the only way that felt right to do it, really.
Yeah,
but no, I'm
a process, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking myself that question all of the time, so it's something that I'm constantly trying to figure out. Yeah.
No, I understand that. I just wanted to ask a little bit before we go into the Q&A, because of the kind of the social climate that we're in right now, I wanted to speak a little bit about personal grief, but political grief. And we've kind of touched on the personal, and thank you so much for just like being so open and sharing that. But I wanted to speak a bit about this political grief that is, you know, something that is so huge. So like the magnitude of it is really just at, and I was about to say at this time, it's not at this time.
It's not at this time,
right?
Yeah.
It's like constant.
Yeah.
And I just want to speak with you a little bit about that. Like, what is your view, or how do you see it in how it affects people? That makes sense. So this like grief and loss that we're having in our government, I personally feel like I'm constantly grieving for like society, like for people that are at the hands of like dying at the hands of police, the people that are not supported by the government or any type of system. So I just want to ask kind of, how do you think that affects people when we're grieving in that way, like for everyone, for society?
I feel like, and we planned this conversation before there was kind of a current sort of overwhelm of really terrible events. And you know, there's a lot of disenfranchised grief. So I think without, you know, looking at our own government and the way that our policies literally take people's lives, and then we're being gaslighted by the people that are responsible for that. It absolutely overwhelms me and so many people when I think of the fact that I'm like, this is an objective fact, and then the people in power are like, no, it's not. Like, that just doesn't exist.
You're like, this is literally happening. Like, we are seeing it happen right before our eyes. Like, what are you doing?
And there's so it's that disenfranchised grief it's at a societal level. So there are countless structures and things in place that we're all responsible for in some way, and there's no way that you can simplify it or discuss it in a way that kind of isn't political, because every death is political in some way. So our entire lives are. yeah, this idea of like sort of disenfranchised grief, that it really hurts to think of the people that are directly grieving the people that they've lost, but also their communities, it's huge, right? It's huge.
Yeah.
And I think after the pandemic, if whatever that looks like,
Yeah.
there's almost like there's a possibility for us to stop and pause and look at this terrible loss of life, not as a result of COVID, not just as a result of that, but of systemic and overt racism, of just awful things that like you say, have always been prevalent. And I think those are the things that are really entangled with community grief, because you think about so one of the and I'm still really developing this thinking of it. So much to learn on this as we all have. But I started asking about community grief when I did my learning marathon, because my initial question was how can we better support communities and families in grief? And I took this question to my learning marathon peers, and they all said, "What do you mean communities in grief? That's a pretty big question." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, no, you're right." But what I had in mind when I wrote it was I was thinking about Grenfell, and I was thinking about all of the people that died, again, at the hands of policy.
Yeah.
And that sense that you almost witness these atrocities and they just become so normalized and so yeah,
it's huge. It is huge. And I feel like I've been really quiet on social media for the past couple of days, or for the past week, I would say, and it's almost been this time of needing to refill, to take a moment, because it is so exhausting. It is so tiring. And I think when we're dealing with this like political grief, a big thing is that actually we can't speak about it in the same way as your personal grief, in a way. Like there's definitely like differences there, because you're talking about grief on like a systematic level, and I think when that grief kind of comes in at that level, it's really hard to almost keep talking about it, even though it's important that we talk about it. But it's really important that we have lots of different allies in those situations, who can speak, like, not over us but for us as well. You mentioned Grenfell, and actually it's taken, and it was necessary that everyone was outraged. Do you know what I mean? It's necessary that that grief is like really shared, and held by lots of different people, because it is so constant in that way, because of the systems that are like kind of at work with that. So thank you for speaking about that, because it's kind of nice to be like say that to someone, and we both just be like, it's exhausting, it's difficult. So because sometimes you feel that you're kind of in a situation where you just kind of got to deal with it, but actually how do you even deal with it when it's so huge,
and when it's ongoing? So we're talking there, without necessarily saying it, we're talking about intergenerational trauma as well. We're talking about just our entire history. And when that doesn't break, that doesn't pause, that doesn't end in any way, then that process is, you're in a state, you're not so much in a state of grief as you're in a state of trauma, because you're still in it. You haven't moved on to that next process of
actually able to be going through that place to grieve it. You're in it. It's food for thought with that, especially with it just being ongoing. It's really important that we, I think, acknowledge that what you've said is like nail in the head, really, that the fact that you can't even grieve it because you're still kind of in it. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of run that past you, because I know how I've been feeling for like my life. And it's difficult, but I think because you did a reading a while ago, and you spoke about what does it look like if grief is like held by the community. And I feel like that's the kind of place where I'm in now. That's the only way that I can deal with the overt, the systematic stuff, is by knowing that so many people are outraged, and so many people are angry, and so many people are banding together. That's something that really helps me. So yeah, thanks so much, Cass. I was so looking forward to us having this talk. I think people be like, looking forward. It's a weird thing to say.
I need to develop a new set of words or something. Advertiser, like, I'm so excited to speak to you about this, and they're like, no, that's really, this is literally really what I was putting on my Instagram. I was going to be like, I'm so excited and happy. And I was like, I mean, I am, but I think it's okay to be excited about a space to process this stuff. Or we don't.
I remember
we don't give it to ourselves.
Like years and years and years ago, my friend passed away, and someone I went to school with, and we'd been very, very close. And then what happened was, for a couple of years we weren't that close. So I went to the funeral, and then I was on the train somewhere a couple of days later maybe, and I saw someone else that we went to school with, and he said, how was the funeral? And I said, oh, it was amazing, it was beautiful, it was amazing. And he was like, and I was like, but it was, do you know what I mean? It was like, you know, Beth was totally honoured, totally, you felt her in the room, you felt her, and you felt the effect she had on people. And that was beautiful, that was amazing. There was, you know, when you're somewhere and you think no one could have represented this person in any other way, like, this is perfect. That's what it was like. So when I was saying this to him, I know why he was looking at me like, what? But
I think that is the right word for it, isn't it? Is the right word when you go through a ritual process and it does what it's supposed to do, and it carries something forward for you. That's when we talk about when children die. Like, Nora's funeral was not the worst day of my life. It wasn't. It was so representative of her and us, and I think about it all the time. I really do. And it is okay that those things are good. But I think it comes back to that thing about not having any nuance, because if you can't look at an experience like a funeral as good, then, you know, because people may think that you think that, you know, you wanted to be there in the first place, you know, you obviously didn't. And I think about that quite a lot, because, you know, I've had people, misguided people, asking questions like, you know, with everything that you've built out of Nora's death, you know, would you want to change anything? And I just think those sorts of questions are just, it's a fool's errand, because you're never going to. I would never wish my daughter dead. You know, I'd take her back in an instant, in whatever form she wanted to come back to me in. But it has given me a lot. She's given me so much, and that can only be a good thing, even if it was a result of her not being here.
Yeah, understand. Right, Cass, we're going to go to the Q&A. First, I just want to say thank you to everyone who has sent in some questions. We've got some really awesome stuff to kind of to talk about. So we kind of are meant to finish at about 1:15. But it's okay if we like have a little bit of kind of spillover, but just to kind of like let you know, because we've got a few things to go through here. So this question is from Imi, and it says, Cass, how do you cope with feeling like you are always talking about Nora? The reason why I ask this isn't because this is what I think you do, but because recently my nan died, and I feel like I just want to talk about it day and night, and every conversation feels like I'm bringing it in. Then I feel bad, because I feel like, do people want to keep hearing this? Like, is there any advice or any reflections on that, Cass?
Yeah, I think part of it is like a bit of a sort of a defiant anger that I have about not having enough space for these people. So like, there's a part of me that I try and model it, but I'm almost like, well, if I had to bury that person, why can't I talk about them all the time? Like that is absolutely within your right to do so. And when you're so recent in that experience as well, it's like, how could you think about anything else? How could you talk about anything else? Like and this kind of comes back to this like wider vision I've got of, can you imagine what it would be like in a world where we just accepted that we talked about our people all the time, like not when they've recently died, but just all the time.
Yeah.
and that's a bit of a simplistic answer, but I think it depends on the circles that you're in as well. So I sometimes I'm really conscious that I feel like I'm talking about Nora all the time, and I it sort of comes back to a reflective practice of asking myself, almost like, if Nora was alive, would I be talking about her the same amount, more, less? Probably the same amount. And that kind of that sits okay with me. You know, I never ever question how much I talk about either.
Yeah.
Because he's here. But so's Nora. And not in an ethereal way, but in a way that she was here and she should be here and she's not. And I think I just think that applies to death at any generation, at any age, at any experience, because there's this kind of concept of, it's almost like a hierarchy of like acceptable grief.
Yeah.
And kind of people kind of give you a bit more space if you've had a really traumatic loss to kind of understand why you're not talking about that all the time. But when it's maybe not so much against the life order, maybe it's more an expected death, that doesn't mean that you haven't lost that person. That person who is so instrumental in who you are, in your experiences. It's like grasping for the spaces to still see them in and to still be with them in, so that when you do need to retreat and you do need to fall apart, you can do it in a way that kind of it's been seen and it's been held. And it's not an easy thing for anybody to do, and I know I come to that with this kind of like defiant, tough sort of attitude.
Yeah.
And
but sometimes I think it's just that though, it's like you said, you don't have to think or question yourself about how much you speak about either.
Yeah.
And even thinking about Nora, how much you would still be do you know what I mean? You're a parent, right, with children. So that's a really interesting question in me, because I think a lot of people who probably experience death feel that as well, like, oh, I'm always talking about this and
And that's why this work is so important, because we have to keep reminding each other of that as well. So I know, despite everything I've sat here and said to you in the last hour, I was just thinking about when we closed Impact Hub and we had the Radical Childcare Day. And Radical Childcare for me, this kind of come over to Civic Square as well, but Radical Childcare has always felt really painful for me, because I was always planning to come to Impact Hub after Royal was born. I was planning to drop my hours to part-time and focus on my studies and base myself at Impact Hub so that Nora could be part of Radical Childcare. And in that, I remember there was a moment where we were doing the children, they were getting the children to draw a picture of themselves. And you handed me the paper, and I said to you, is it weird to add one for Nora? And we kind of looked at each other and we were like, no, that's not weird, that's fine, because we would be doing it if she was still part of it. But even in that moment, I felt a bit strange about doing that. And I asked you, somebody that has listened to me and has reflected on, what Nora means to me, and you were like, no, that's okay. That makes a lot of sense. So it's kind of like being able to check in with people as well. To get that validation almost, that, it is totally okay to do that.
100%. Okay, so I've got one more question. Well, not one more, there's a few more questions, but the next question is from Alison, and it says, you mentioned at the start about talking about those who have died as still in our life. How do you do this? I would love to lean into talking about some of the people who I feel are still with me, in me, influencing me. I always talk about them in the past tense when they still feel very present.
And I think that is So one of the things that I try to avoid doing, and it's never easy, and sometimes I don't avoid doing it, but I try and imagine that if Nora, like the life that we would have lived if Nora was here, isn't one we ever would have had. Like I try not to think, well, Nora should be here right now, and therefore, if she was, would we be doing this particular thing? Would we live in this house? Would we have this job? Like I try not to sit and pick through like what our life should look like with her in it, because our lives do have her in it, but in a different way, and that's not. I don't want that to come across as something that is easy, because it isn't. But it's that process of like, okay, well, that is my reality, and I do talk about Nora in the past tense and sometimes in the present, but she's dead. She is, and that is something that I've had to process and have to process all of the time. And I think a lot of it comes down to doing the internal work first, because if it wouldn't be safe or reasonable for me to be bringing this stuff forward if I wasn't always doing that work as well. And kind of it's a constant sort of like contracting and sort of expanding nature of like where that person sits with you in your life at that point. And when you talk about them, you know, so I'm coming to this from a position that I've had very, very excellent trauma therapy, and we'd need another couple of hours to talk about trauma and grief, but like grief and trauma often sit hand in hand, but they are not the same thing. And it is very it's incredibly dangerous if you are processing trauma of any kind to look at. I think, and this is my opinion. This is my opinion in this conversation right now. If you are experiencing trauma and grief, you should look at the trauma first, because the grieving process is just going to keep re-traumatizing you. So it's kind of it's tied up in a lot of that as well. But it comes back to what I was saying to answer Emmy's question: is just do it and talk about them in a way that feels comfortable to you. You don't feel like you have to share too much of them, because there's a whole feeling around giving away something of somebody when they're not here to sort of allow you to do that. Which again is a whole other conversation. But I think like maybe even just giving yourself permission to start with, that it is okay for you to consider the influence that they still have on your life, the feelings that you have around them. And you know, I don't talk to Nora. So I know some people do, and some people find that quite comforting. But you know, when I'm thinking about Nora, I don't sort of think about her as sitting alongside me as much as sort of accepting as she is. But even that can help. That can be helpful. You know, you see something that somebody might, you know, you see something in a shop when we're allowed back in shops, that you think, oh, they would have loved that. Like, it's okay to be like, oh, you would have loved that. You know, like. And if you can start doing it with yourself, then I think maybe it becomes a bit more safe for you to do it outside of yourself as well.
Yeah. Okay. Next question is from Bing. I'd love to hear more about. I'd love to hear more about Scraps and Post Scattered Mind zine.
Yes.
And ask, what is it about drawing, printing, and folding paper that feels like it's a useful medium for Cass to explore this complex topic?
Yeah, so Scraps of a Post Scattered Mind is a zine that I started with, as many zines do, great intentions to be like a monthly sort of process for me. And the zine format is really, it's so physical, it's so like constructive. So my Scraps of a Post Scattered Mind is a collection of my illustrations and thoughts about just stuff that I experience, just things that are connected to, you know, trauma responses and grief and just like normal stuff as well. So it's the sort of the putting it to paper and the sitting and folding and, you know, scoring the line through the middle to get the right fold and all that sort of stuff. Navigating the Wilderness and the website didn't feel like the right place for those kinds of expressions. And like I'm thinking, it's in the edition that I've got out is there's an image in there of there's a day that the front door handle came off. So we were going to bed, we'd just come home, Rob locked the door and the front door handle came off, just in his hand. And he came up to me and said, the front door handle's like come off. I don't know if we're locked in or if we're locked out. And I sort of looked at him, I was exhausted, and I just said, can you just make sure that there's enough space in the living room so that if we need an ambulance, we can get through the back door.
Yeah.
And like I said that, and I went up to bed, and I thought, my God, that's not a normal thing to think, is it? Like, most people would be like, oh, no, they make sure that the house is secure. I was like, no, if there's an emergency situation, we need to be able to get paramedics to either. And I just reflecting on that, I was like, oh, that's quite that's a traumatized mind that's thinking that, and it didn't feel right to put those in Navigating the Wilderness, because it just, I don't know, it just felt like something that was so much more of me than I wanted to publish online. But sitting and drawing those things out and scanning them in and laying them out, and I print them to order, so if somebody orders them, I print it out, I know who it's going to, so there's something like quite reflective in the process of printing it, cutting it to size, knowing who's going to be receiving that and what that might be. Sort of, it feels like an interaction between me and that person rather than just something that's out there in the void.
Yeah. And I guess as well, because it's like you said, these things that you were like, you know, that you wouldn't maybe put on Navigating the Wilderness, that connection thing is really real, right? Because you are actively like, this is a part of me that I don't put elsewhere or whatever. So yeah, just the idea of like printing things for like as they're ordered and you just knowing who that's going to, that's pretty awesome. Okay, so another question from Rob is, how does your practice relate to the current COVID-19 crisis?
So it kind of, as we've already discussed, really, it's kind of the crisis led me to formalise the work. So I was planning to do it anyway, but I didn't feel able to offer anything until I had the structures and the responsibility sort of built into that. So through the thanatology practice now, I can offer workshops and coaching and spaces to process this stuff, but in an online format. And I kind of, there's a part of me that doesn't see this work sitting in the current crisis, but kind of after. And it's just kind of accelerated everybody's, not so much capacity to talk about death and grief, but need to, and the need to kind of have those spaces to memorialise people and to recognise the sort of the stuff lost as well as the people that they've lost. It's just really accelerated what I'm doing, and I don't want that to be the case. But you know, we're talking about good things that can grow out of terrible things, and that is one of them. This is another question from Rob. Do you interface with the NHS, and what can people do to help themselves with their own grief? Can I just quickly jump in a little bit there? Rob, we have some resources that Cass has given to us, so we will post those to you as well, because I think this question's from YouTube. So I do in a way, but not in a way that's been developed yet. So before the pandemic, I was doing some work with my local NHS trust, some service design work, about to write a bid for a service that supports bereaved parents in a perinatal mental health service. And that piece of work was kind of starting, and I've got lots of thoughts about where this might go, in the sense that there's a signposting responsibility. So there's a space that I'm kind of developing and thinking about how maybe I can feed into referrals and referral processes for people that need more sort of health intervention type work. So maybe psychotherapy or something that isn't met in the sort of charity sector or helpline type stuff. But there's also a lot of work to be done for people in the NHS as well. So a lot of medical training doesn't really necessarily address grief and bereavement or even a person dying until those people are on the ground dealing with that. So there's some work to do about kind of bringing in all of my sort of all the stuff that kind of sits into the thanatology practice and creating a space for other people with lived experience to feed back into those services. Again, just to make sure that they are actually reflecting what people need. That's kind of all stuff that's going to follow over the next couple of years.
Amazing. So we have another question from Smajit, and it says, can you tell us what the book was called, please? It sounds really interesting. Explaining death to an adult is hard and even harder for a child, so it sounds really helpful. This was when we were speaking about the research, it was like the first one of the first books that you mentioned.
1 second.
That's okay.
So the book it's just a children's fiction book.
Okay.
It's upstairs. No, okay. I think it's just called The Tree. But I can get these and send those over if they can be shared in some other way. But there's another book that is for really useful for explaining death to children, and that is called The Memory Book.
The Memory Book, okay, yeah.
I can probably find a link to these and share those. And this walks you through what happens when one of the animals in the forest dies and how the animals process that. And like holding vigil with the fox's body. And
is this by Laura Avery?
No, this is. No. Let me do a quick Google while we're answering other questions, and I'll post some of the books that I'd recommend.
Yep, that's fine. So we've got another question, and it says, how do you deal with grief if the rituals enacted for the person lost has not represented them as beautifully as you would have liked? Wow, that's a huge question. It kind of goes on the back of what we're saying about Beth, like just having this funeral that was the most like perfect for her. And I think this also happens a lot in the queer community. Let's say someone is trans and then they're not the right pronouns aren't used at their funeral or things like that. And it actually does, I think, happen more often than we think. Sometimes people are different. Sometimes people's family view them as different, right? As like a different version of themselves to maybe your chosen community. So I think like that. If you want to just, take that.
It's almost like a grief process in itself. And it kind of links into what I was saying about disenfranchised grief and how if you're grieving something and it's not recognised, whether that's because it's misunderstood or because it's actively not recognised, then it can really infringe on the grieving process. And I say the grieving process because, and I don't mean in a sort of linear stages way, but like the ongoing lifelong process of grieving and everything that entails. And I think that there's always room for developing. So one of the things that I've been thinking about and was talking to my husband about was the idea of like, whatever you need to do when you're grieving, do until it isn't useful anymore. And that's okay. And I think that sometimes, and we've witnessed it on a sort of small scale in the pandemic, is that we've had you know, when something happens and it's kind of ritualized and processed, people want to do it every week at the same time, and it's a bit like, well, actually, you don't need to do something. If you do something once, it doesn't have to be the thing that you always do. And that's something that my interactions with my friend have kind of shown me. I remember thinking about Nora's first birthday, and we felt like we wanted to mark it, but whatever we did, if we did that, we felt like we'd have to do for the rest of our lives for Nora's birthday. And it didn't feel right to make a decision like that, because you never make decisions that big. So like from a kind of a sort of a level of when a person is memorialized in a way that doesn't fit with them, that doesn't kind of, there's a secondary loss there. There's a loss of the ability to go through a ritual that is really meaningful to them and to you. And I think that there's a lot to be said for doing stuff after, and that won't erase what has happened. So you know, you're talking about when people are misgendered, and people are dead now, literally in their death, that hurt isn't going to go away. But their individual communities, their people, can absolutely get together and forge their own ritual within that. And that's something that kind of arts and creativity kind of is a real gift for, because you can sit and look at what you can do that doesn't quite sit in the way that you might have envisioned it. And that sort of thing, I'm always happy to help people with. So if anybody has experienced that and they do want to get in touch to talk about how you could do another ritual, then I'm more than happy to sort of hear that. But yeah, it's absolutely something that really can complicate grief.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, I quite like that. It's almost like reclaiming the ritual that makes the most sense or feels right. And I think that's a really beautiful thing that we're able to do to honor like people as well. So we've gone over a little bit, but there was nothing in me that wanted to rush this conversation. Like there's nothing. It's just been so wonderful to like really speak to you and do that in a way where we've been able to actually like talk about quite a lot, and touch on different parts, I think, of grief and loss and death, but also, you know, being really honest and being able to say there's still a difference between the trauma if you're like in it right now and the grieving process. So I just want to say thank you so much, Cass, for just really being so open and kind of giving us this type of insight, and it is really necessary for us to be able to have these conversations in a really normalized way. So thank you so much for doing that, and we've shared your kind of like your social media in the talk as well, and the resources too. So what I'll just kind of say is obviously the resources that we've like signposted people to in the chat. Thank you for putting those together for kind of the aftercare of this talk, and it was really important for me to mention that at the beginning because and we kind of had this when we spoke to Demi 2 weeks ago. Demi was saying that kind of aftercare thing is as important as the thing that we're in now. So thank you so much for that. And if anyone needs to kind of get in touch with you, your website is also in the chat as well, and your email too. So thank you so much, Cass. Thank you so much for everyone that has kind of tuned in, not only just this session, but all the sessions before that, you know, on the Settees, like our first kind of venture out into kind of programming and all of that stuff, and I just want to say thanks for everyone who's kind of, you know, just come in, shared it, been really like loving and caring about it, and yeah, it's just been really amazing. You know, it's the kind of last series in the artist talks, but on the Settee there will be more programming happening, and from us at Civic Square, and actually more so from the front room. We have a festival coming up, which is Department of Dreams, and you can find out more kind of about what we're doing and where we are at civicsquare.cc and thefrontroom.cc. So that is kind of me wrapping up, I guess. So yeah, thank you so much, Cass. Really appreciate it. And thank you all for just kind of being here. It's been like pretty amazing. Thank you all. It's been great.
I would just add to that wrap up as we are ending this process. Try not to jump into anything else too quickly. Just take a couple of minutes to yourself now, just have a think about what we talked about. And yeah, just look after yourself a little bit. It's never easy to have a conversation like this.
Oh, it's never ever easy to do that. I'm just going to leave you with just a bit of a shared screen of just some of the the past talks, and please just check out our website because you can actually sign up to see like what we're doing like all the time basically, and it'll be really great to kind of really connect with you all past this, and thanks for everyone who's just been like riding with us. Like it's been a lot and it's been really great as well. So yeah, thank you all so much.